Nowadays, Batman's either falling from space or he's shooting his own children in the face to protect the Joker, reducing Batman to nothing but a brooding brawler. I think Batman tends to be more interesting when, instead of fighting crime, Batman is actually shown solving it, outthinking a villain instead of outpunching them. So I've gathered together a few stories that are detective-centric to convince you, and by the end, if I don't, well, I'll just sit in the shower and let the water run for a while. Primarily taking place inside of a morgue. In Batman Black and White #1, Batman goes through the many ways to inspect an unidentified body after a murder. But while doing so, he treats the Jane Doe with respect, constantly reminding himself that the body in front of him was a person that lived a life and not an object. Batman also can't help himself in asking the Jane Doe questions that simply slip into the void, leaving Batman having to draw upon his own conclusions. Now, usually a forensic pathologist would be the one investigating the body. Obviously, because Batman isn't fucking real. Batman dabbles in a bit of everything enough that he can perform his own autopsy, and so this comic, while not covering every single aspect of an autopsy, manages to cover the numbness of routine a person could have doing this job, and the total bleakness of looking into that void for a living. So flawlessly. Looking upon the body's fractured wrist, Batman deduces that the perpetrator struck at her with a blunt object. Going further, he finds that she was choked for a considerable amount of time, as the bruising around her neck and the caked blood in her mouth suggests, and whether it be a trick of the mind, Batman almost sees a smile on her face, as if to let him know that she's okay wherever she's gone off to. But Batman swiftly reminds himself that it's just rigor mortis setting in. For a spell, Batman gazes at the various markings on the body. Only it's one gash in particular that happens to pique Batman's interest the most, on the body's right hand and between the knuckles. Batman smirks at the fact that she went out swinging, because for some small miracle, Batman finds one of the killer's teeth nestled between the knuckles. And for those that don't know, finding a tooth is like an express ticket to finding the murderer. So Jane Doe got the bastard in the end. But it only works if authorities have a presumed to be suspect, because just off the tooth alone, it could take weeks or months, even years to get the killer. So Batman must go deeper. And so dissecting her stomach, Batman finds undigested blueberry pie. And cross-referencing the crime scene to nearby diners serving blueberry pie around the time of death, Batman shows a photo of the victim to several waitresses until finally getting a hit. Chelsea Rain is the body's name. Chelsea was 30. Chelsea loved the opera. Chelsea loved to read. Chelsea had her whole life ahead of her, until a crazed boyfriend, relative, or just some random insane bastard came along and took it from her. The saddest part is that whether the killer is brought to justice in the end or not, Chelsea has gone into the void forever, to be gone and forgotten. But Batman won't forget. Batman never forgets. What does a quiet night in Gotham look like for Batman? Well, he listens in on 911 calls as they're received by dispatchers and arrives to the scene, like Batman Confidential number 49, which is a pretty good story surrounding Batman answering a 911 call that turns bloody. Arriving to an apartment complex, inside the home he finds one female and one male dead from shotgun wounds through the chest and back. Determining that the woman had her back to the shotgun, Batman deduces that the woman was protecting a child, but only finding two bodies, it could mean that the child got away. Following the most minute possible clues to catch a killer before murdering a child, Batman finds yellow carpeting fibers foreign to the apartment and a laundry chute that could fit a small child, really taking a shot in the dark. Batman follows the chute down to the basement and at first finds tracks of some laundry equipment that had been moved recently, and that the rusted shut chute was recently forced open, but no child. So Batman scans the handle praying for a fingerprint, and by the grace of God, it's a print matching a tenant living in the 8th floor of the complex. Rushing to the apartment of the possible killer, Batman finds that the carpet matches the yellow carpeting found earlier. The tenant recently lost his job. The tenant's been off of his meds. His partner recently left him, and the tenant had a view of the murdered family from across the complex. Putting all of the pieces together, this is the killer. However, it's as Batman steps on a purposely raised floorboard, the killer tries shotgunning Batman, until he holds the shotgun to the child's head, manically exclaiming that the reason he killed this little girl's family is because while he failed in life at every given turn, he witnessed her family succeed time and again, always happy. And getting so sick and tired of seeing that every day, he wanted nothing more than to make them suffer like him for once. Luckily, while the killer was waffling out his backstory, Batman stopped listening half an hour ago to remember the killer's listed phone number, to call the killer's phone, creating an opening to defuse the situation. Only all three of them would end up falling out of a nearby window. In free fall, Batman ties the killer to the building by his foot, which breaks his leg and hip from the speed, and catches the girl right in the nick of time, subsequently crashing into another apartment, before bringing the child back to Gordon to be taken care of, flying back out into the night to take on another 911 call. It's something about Batman taking 911 calls that is such an awesome concept to me in this chaotic world with hundreds of superheroes and shit. Because what does this world really look like from the GCPD's perspective? Well, one of the greatest crime thriller writers writers named Ed Brubaker challenged this very idea, writing a 40-issue series not about Batman, but the people that work in the GCPD. It has a cast of distinct detectives like Renee Montoya, my favorite, Marcus Driver, and Ralph Cifaretto, handling wild cases revolving around Batman's coterie of villains, with Mr. Freeze being the debut villain of the series, showcasing the insanity of what it'd look like showing up to a crime scene to find your best friend shattered into several blocks of ice, and the ridiculousness for a police force to rely on a vigilante in a bat costume to catch the guy. Detective Marcus, quite frankly embarrassed that the GCPD basically counts on Batman to do all the heavy lifting, decides screw that fucking guy. We took this job for a reason. We're competent detectives, and it's time we started acting like it. They go door to door, cover every single hint that can lead him to Mr. Freeze. And in the end, while it's not them who slam the cuffs on the guy, it is them who can say to Batman that we helped you for a change, and not the other way around. The series also covers plenty of other amazing cases, but this video isn't going to serve to spoil the entirety of the series. I merely just wanted to show you that there is a real good detective-centric series set in Batman's world that I read the entirety of in about 4 days. Now, what if despite all the superhero weaknesses Batman can discover, or the fact that he indirectly created himself through time travel, someone just walked up to Batman, put their hands on his shoulder, and said that was all in his fucking head? Well, let's take the Batman mask. The story starts off with Batman breaking in people's faces for an attempted robbery, after which Batman starts tripping major balls. Coming to inside of a hospital, Bruce starts flipping the fuck out because he's unmasked. Yet the doctor and nurse try telling Bruce that he's just some bum they found half dead in an alley in Gotham, which makes sense to Bruce as his body isn't as strong as before. That's when Bruce is also met by a doctor named Mike Clayton, since it convinced Bruce that Batman and everything he's ever experienced isn't real, that Batman is simply the manifestation of all the trauma Bruce couldn't endure on his own after losing his parents. And really, Bruce has just been a drunken hobo roaming Gotham streets in tattered clothing and trash bags for years, believing he's the fictional superhero Batman. For a while, Bruce is convinced that everything he's lived through as Batman is a lie, until the reality Bruce is living in starts to cave in on itself. With this happening, it reinforces in Bruce's mind that he is Batman, and presses through the reality forced upon him, leading Bruce down a rabbit hole of his own mind, until he finally comes out of it with a clear head. Confronting Dr. Clayton, Clayton confesses to Batman that while fighting the previous thugs, he'd shot Batman with a psychotropic drug and induced a 6 to 7 week coma, purposefully keeping Bruce malnourished, so that when Bruce would awaken, Bruce would be convinced that the life he'd been living was all a lie. However, Clayton had underestimated Bruce's indomitable will and perception, which ultimately led to his own downfall, proving that nothing can ever get past Batman, no matter how convincing. When reading this though, I was a bit let down because I thought Mad Hatter or Hugo Strange was going to show up. Mad Hatter is such a deeply underrated Batman villain in my opinion, and the story pays a lot of homage to Alice in Wonderland, and I've never really seen that much involving Hugo Strange except for Arkham City and the Prey storyline, so my thought process was that Batman was experimented on in a crazy brain simulation or something, but no. That aside, I think it's still a great Batman story on its own and definitely worth reading. Well, what about Batman Long Halloween or Dark Victory or Hush? Man, I love those stories as much as the next guy, except for Hush. I bought those DC comeback books a while back, right? And Hush was one of the last Batman stories I had left to read. Only it left me in a state of numbness, so I just re-gifted it for Christmas in hopes someone else would like it more than I did. All I know is Hush 2 is fucking dirt, and the only good Hush story ever made was Heart of Hush. Paul Dini almost saved that character with some ink and a dream by making Hush 10 times more interesting when he actually utilized Thomas Elliot's skills as a surgeon to surgically graft his face to look like Bruce Wayne, to not only be him, but to fulfill his crazy mother's wish for her son to be more like Bruce Wayne, and yet never allowing Thomas the freedom to actually make something of himself, causing Thomas to become so tapped in his head that he thought there was nothing he could do that'd ever satisfy his mother's expectations than to literally become Bruce Wayne, making the context behind Thomas attempting to kill both of his parents for their fortune even more unhinged, and all the more depressing when Thomas is left as nothing but a hollow shell of a human being. Anyway, Dark Patterns is a series of 4 different cases Batman must solve that all have one underlying connection: fire. The first case surrounds a killer known as the Wound Man, who makes his victims feel the most amount of pain a human can possibly feel until the moment of death, by hammering nails into each of the victim's nerves and vital organs. Going on 3 killings and no leads, Batman tells us that if a killer has killed more than a few times, more often than not, it's the first victim that has the biggest connection to the killer, and ties everything together, providing clarity to the pattern. So looking into the first victim's background, he finds that the victim was a lawyer that happened to work for either the city or for companies like Ace Chemicals and Sionis. Batman can tell that a majority of the cases he handled were large cover-ups, and so following the paper trail, it leads him to a far-off town just outside of Gotham called Greenfields. Ace Chemicals had a chemical leak that happened to afflict the town of Greenfields, rendering the entirety of the town completely numb to every sensation, explaining how the Wound Man was able to hammer all those nails into his body. But now that we know how the Wound Man is the Wound Man, why did the Wound Man take it upon himself to do such a thing in the first place? Well, as it had turned out, Dr. Jessup Hartnell, now the Wound Man, had a life before all of this. He was married and had a beautiful life in his suburban home, until one night, a fire spread throughout Dr. Hartnell's home, and his wife slept through the whole thing, dying in the blaze. After which, because Hartnell was unable to feel anything, Hartnell was driven into becoming a monster to take revenge against those responsible. And although, yes, the Wound Man is a killer, this story is meant to show that sometimes there's more to the monster than just face value, and that sometimes the true villain of the story is the one who played a role in creating them. Now on to the second case, which happens to be my favorite out of the four, being a Raid Redemption-esque Batman story, as it centers around one of Batman's highly underrated villains, Scarface. Like something akin to the Wizard of Oz, Scarface's voice bounces from the bottom of the building to the top, making most of the tenants inclined to believe that Scarface is something like a voice of God. They feel compelled to follow Scarface's commands, whether through blind faith or fear. So in order for Batman to stop Scarface's charade once and for all, Batman must go up floor by floor. Only in doing so, Batman arrives at the unexpected. Albert Wesker, the one whom always puppeteers Scarface, tied up with his tongue cut out. One of the most haunting aspects of the story is in Scarface's last-ditch effort for control, burning Bleeding Towers down to the ground, and as the fire would soon spread throughout the building, while in the center of the blaze, Albert would see within it the shape of Scarface, after which Dr. Sarika, Gordon, and Batman, recounting everything, are all left to wonder if Scarface and Bleeding Towers were just vessels for Albert and the other tenant to control, or if the voices of the tower were in fact supernatural. This last panel is so foreboding, and I love how the haunting aspect of Scarface in the story is utilized perfectly. Now in the next story, it centers around a part of Gotham most tend to look away from and ignore, called the Rookery. It's completely run down. There are no street names or numbers. Most of the homes have no electricity or water. Some homes are really constructed wherever that just hang precariously over alleys or tunnel through other buildings. It's the lowest point in the whole of Gotham, and what attracts Batman to the Rookery happens to be a fire. And at its center, a body burned head to toe inside of a dryer. Now from here, I'm going to give it up for a Twitter user by the name of Marcy, who just blew my mind with how involved they went in terms of the forensics aspect of this story. See, this body on the table that Sarika and Batman look over has been burned from head to toe. And from a glance, Batman believes the body to be a person recently deceased. And the fact that the body's eyelids, nose, ears, fingernails, and lips are still visible supports this fact. So the body, you'd think, would still be in active or advanced decay. As Marcy states, as well as adding that they find out the gender of the body to be female, although that can't be determined unless the body were to be fully skeletonized. So skipping ahead a bit, strangely, we find out alongside Batman that the body is one to have been decades old, but decomposition to the point of skeletonization happens relatively within a couple weeks to a few months, as Marcy states, adding that some things such as clothing or weather can slow the process a bit, but in this case, there isn't a world where she wouldn't be bones by now. Marcy rants about this inconsistency, but doesn't knock on the comic for it, but rather remarks that they love ruining people's fun, because where most of the average comic readers wouldn't notice it, Marcy did, and now you will too. With that out of the way, thanks to Marcy, this case drives Batman to the brink, given that no one wants to help on the case since it took place in the Rookery, and no one in the Rookery really wants to help Batman either. But one of the funny things is that Alfred is actually the most significant person to help Bruce in this story. And looking back at this page in particular is one of the most crazy feelings. Specifically because this is the main clue that ties this entire case together, and Bruce just dismisses it as pareidolia. For days, Batman follows red herring after red herring until he's unexpectedly shot in the back. Taken in and tied up, Batman discovers that the man responsible was the equivalent to a stolen valor gangster, a complete poser who dug up a body to recreate the Red Hood Gang's old execution style, to make the Rookery believe the Red Hood Gang was still alive before dying, although never being a member of the gang itself. And so Batman mocks the old man for being nothing but a pathetic poser parading himself to the kids, helping him like he's some legend. And the funniest thing about it all is that despite the old man's efforts, no one even cared about the body found. Everyone went on living. And yet in the old man's plan to execute Batman, it goes horribly wrong as he accidentally drops his rifle, causing it to fire killing one of the boys and shocking the old man so much to die of a heart attack, pretty much ending with Batman failing and the Rookery forever hating Batman for stepping in on their turf, since all Batman really did was leave the town with more fear and pain in the end. Now for the fourth and final case, it surrounds the Child of Fire, a pyromaniac set on burning down the order of Gotham to preserve the chaos of myth. The person in the background of every case that came before, as it was the Child of Fire that aided Batman in stopping the Moon Man after discovering his origin began in fire. To control the narrative of the story, it was the Child of Fire who convinced Scarface to take officers hostage and planted the idea of burning the building down as a last resort, to control the myth of the voice of Bleeding Towers. And it was the Child of Fire who started the Rookery fire when no one noticed the body in the dryer for days, luring Batman to the Rookery and becoming a myth of his own, convincing the Child of Fire that the fire of Gotham has a mind of its own, and seeks to burn the order of everything to the ground. It's the story that ties everything together magnificently. Dan Waters and Hayden Sherman did an outstanding job on this series, and I really and truly believe this is hands down one of the greatest Batman detective stories ever made. I came a little late to the Dark Patterns party, which I really regret because now physical issues are being sold for like $1,000, but the paperback is out in March of this year, so I'm really looking forward to that pretty soon. I wanted to go over Batman faces in this video because this specific panel made the light bulb in my head go off to make this video in the first place, but I dream of one day doing a Two-Face oriented video, so that'll have to wait. And by the time I finished the script of this video, I began reading Batman Death by Design, which I also quite enjoyed, being a 50s-esque tactile crime thriller centering around the many aspects of architectural corruption like fraud, unethical practices by developers and city officials gaining from cutting astronomical corners, leading to terrible buildings being made for the purpose of demolishing, all for more public funds to line the 1%'s pockets. I also really like the character Exactamundo and his backstory, being the son of Gotham's most influential architect who had to witness his father's spark of life dwindle for years, as he was forced to make substandard buildings for corrupt Gotham officials instead of buildings that left you enchanted with the beauty of Gotham, making it Exactamundo's mission to tearing down the deeply rooted corruption of Gotham and building wonders in its stead. Joker's also here to help destroy buildings, but he's just doing it to do it, and you gotta respect him for being honest. Overall, I made this video to shed light on some really good detective-oriented stories that I truly love featuring Batman, because I recently fell back in love with reading the character. I know that I sound dramatic when I say that out loud, but I guess over time I simply just got fatigued from Batman. I guess that so much time away from Batman really did me a favor, because now I have an even greater curiosity, appreciation, and perspective of the character than ever before. I definitely want to read more stuff featuring Oracle. Cassandra Cain is the fucking GOAT, by the way. And has anyone ever thought about how hard Alfred's life must be? Being Bruce's butler, chauffeur, personal assistant, medic, cook, counselor, accountant, and the guy in the chair. Like, granted, he gets paid fucking millions of dollars, but man, just listen to the way Bruce treats Alfred in Arkham Origins.
Sir, a moment of your time.
What do you want?
Sir, I've just seen the explosion at the Gotham Royal on the news. The hotel guests, are they safe?
Not now, Alfred.
You know, I made a promise of my own to your parents.
No sign of any casualties.
Not now, Alfred.
Alfred is probably happy he's dead, but that's enough yapping from me. I hope you enjoyed this unconventional video about some cool stories featuring Batman as a detective. Deuces.
Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and check out my socials and my Patreon too. See ya next time!
This has been a Mullet-Man production.